Welcome back to Season 2 of The Other Side of the Chart. We're starting the season a little differently by returning to the voices that shaped the beginning of this show. Today, you're going to hear from the first 5 guests, a patient, clinicians, innovators, and leaders, all coming at healthcare from different angles, but all trying to answer the same question. How do we make care more human? When I started The Other Side of the Chart, my goal was really very simple. I wanted to bring forward the conversations that too often get lost between the exam room and the boardroom. I wanted to tell the stories behind the systems we build and to remind those of us shaping those systems, myself included, that the patient has to remain at the center. Over the past year, I've had the privilege of sitting with 5 remarkable guests. And what stood out wasn't actually their individual stories, it was the through lines, the tension between documentation and dignity, between efficiency and empathy, between what our systems are designed to do and how they actually feel to the people living inside them. So this episode, it isn't a recap, and it's not a finale. It's a foundation. We're opening season 2 by listening again, using those voices to ground the conversations ahead and to be clear about what the show is really here to explore. This is The Other Side of the Chart, Reflections from the First 5. And we begin where we should, with the patient. Dalia, our first guest, shared something subtle but profound, the disconnect between how she feels and how the system documents her. Her chart tells one story, her lived experience tells another.
I feel like my chart presents me as a very serious person with very serious problems. Those mental health check questionnaires. So if I answer those honestly, I probably need to be checked into a psych ward because I'm under a lot of stress because I'm being diagnosed with cancer. So I filled it out honestly at one of my visits. They're really unfair questions for someone who just got diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. I am not sleeping well. I'm very worried. I think I'm going to die. These are all very real feelings. It doesn't mean I'm having a mental breakdown. I'm having very normal human feelings. The data doesn't reflect the person.
Yeah.
And it's impossible to do that, right? But I don't know, maybe little things in the chart, like husband makes bad jokes.
That tension between the person and the chart is woven through every chapter of Dalia's life. And to understand the weight of her insights, you have to understand the weight of her story.
I'm 48 years old and I've had cancer 4 times. My first tumor was removed when I was a year and a half old. Cancer has been a major part of my life. My mom died of cancer. My aunt died of cancer. I never met my grandfather on my mother's side. And then as an adult, when I was 31 years old, I was diagnosed with breast cancer, then colon cancer, and now pancreatic cancer. All of them separate, discrete cancers.
Her experiences weren't theoretical. They were lived, often while navigating contradictory guidance in moments when clarity mattered most.
During breast cancer, one time I had to go to the hospital ER because I was having an unfortunate symptom. I ended up being admitted into the hospital. They decided that I needed to have surgery to get my appendix out. I was just like, hold on. I was told I should not have surgeries while I'm doing chemo because of the potential for infection. By the way, I did not come in for appendicitis. I have no symptoms of appendicitis. They had just done a CAT scan and it looked like my appendix was inflamed. I was just like, I'm okay with you doing this if you talk to my oncologist. And they're like, well, can you call her? So I called her, immediately called the doctor, and they decided to try antibiotics first rather than put me into surgery and risk infection because my blood counts were low.
And then there were moments that revealed what care can be when a clinician stepped out from behind the chart and met her as a human being.
First thing she did was hug me
Hmm.
before anything. She hugged me. She's like, hug me this way so you can feel my heartbeat. I was like, and I just melted
Sure.
and started crying. And she's like, you just realize and are acknowledging that you've had cancer.
Dalia's story brought us face to face with what it means to live inside the system we've built, one that can save lives, yet often makes patients fight for every inch of understanding. She showed us that empathy isn't a soft skill, it's a clinical skill, one that can change outcomes as much as any treatment plan. And she also reminded us that systems aren't neutral. They're designed, and design choices either support patients or force them to struggle through the gaps.
Other thing is design actually matters. And I never would have thought about that. But how you create spaces and how you move people really can impact the experience. The primary place where you see this is ERs, and how they move people can either make the experience horrific or it can make it really good.
If Dalia showed us what it feels like to live inside a system that isn't built around patients, Dr. Victor Montori showed us what happens when clinicians are trapped inside those very same systems.
So systems that enable people, enable caregivers
Mhm.
to, they have protocols to keep everyone safe, but they have professionals that are enabled in their ability to notice and respond, and they're able to create these moments of deep human connection that transforms both the caregiver and the care receiver and makes care not something exhausting, but rather a renewable resource. And so how do we design systems in which the clinicians can come in as whole selves and create systems that do not overwhelm them with protocol, but enable them to be caring people? I think that's a fundamental point.
Victor helped us name what so many clinicians feel but rarely articulate: that healthcare has become industrialized, fast, efficient, and increasingly disconnected from the human beings inside it.
Your particular history as a person and what kind of life you're trying to live now, and how that life is in some way interfered by your conditions or the treatments for your conditions. All of that is kept in the background. And what you are receiving really is not care, but you're being processed through by a system, particularly among the top systems that are really geared to actually provide access to this disease management strategies and quick throughput so that efficiency can be achieved. That sense that you got, instead of receiving care, you got sort of processed through, is a hallmark of industrialization, the pursuit of efficiency, of receiving care for people like you, but not for you, the sense that you remain a bit of a blur to the person seeing you. And it turns out that it not only affects the patient who is being processed, but also the clinician. Clinicians like me show up to make connections with people, show up to make a difference in the lives of people, to be changed by our interaction with people. But something we cannot do if we don't get to appreciate people in both their biology and their biography in unhurried conversations.
And then he brought us back to something essential: that care is a meeting between the two human lives, not two roles performing tasks. He challenged us to resist the forces that speed us up, flatten our relationships, and make suffering invisible. He encouraged us to practice what he calls careful and kind care.
It's so much about learning who the person in front of you as a clinician is, the other side of the chart, and recognizing that there's a whole world, there's a whole life playing out. There's a whole drama of that life playing out, in which our words, our expressions, our warmth, our kindness, our compassion, our technical expertise, our prescriptions are all going to now interact chemically almost with this other life.
Where Dr. Victor Montori spoke to the pressures shaping everyday clinical encounters, Dr. Barbara Morris brought us to its most profound edge, the end of life.
And so we did the work of medical aid in dying. But what I really want to talk about is that what he wanted was to have his suffering addressed. He had been through every kind of treatment the past year. Nothing was working. His pain was increasing. His suffering was increasing. And he just wanted to be listened to. And we were able to move ahead relatively quickly in being able to approve him for medical aid in dying. And when I saw him just a day before he took medication, I'll never forget him on the screen when I said any other questions or could I do anything else for him. He looked at me and he blew me a kiss and gave me a big thumbs up. And that, I think, is the story of what patients want. They want to be heard and they want to have their suffering addressed.
Dr. Barbara Morris illustrated what patients most long for at the end of life, not more interventions, but to have their suffering witnessed and their wishes honored.
So, this question about what's truly patient-centered, if you'd asked me that a decade ago, I would have said, oh, well, it's just what the patient wants. Like, that should be simple. It's not so simple because sometimes the patients don't know what they want. Sometimes we presume to know. Sometimes what the loved ones want and what the patient wants may be different.
They're not the same. Yeah.
So, I had an ethics mentor who used to say when we'd ask questions, every answer was, it depends. And that's true in end-of-life care, right?
Yeah.
The only way to really do patient-centered approach in end-of-life care is, one, to put the patient at the center, which sounds obvious, but doesn't happen most of the time these days, and to be able to take the time and the effort to really step back and listen and try to set aside what we think is important and what we would like, which affects all of us, but we kind of have to set that aside.
Dr. Barbara Morris brought a different but equally powerful lens, one grounded in dignity, agency, and truth-telling, especially at the end of life. She challenged us to acknowledge that dying well is part of living well, and that the hardest conversations are often the most compassionate ones.
So imagine the end-of-life toolbox, right? And it has many things in it: hospice care, comfort care, medication, spiritual care, like I've talked about. And then over the past decades in the United States, we've been able to add medical aid in dying as an option. Medical aid in dying is a way that patients who have the capacity can choose to hasten their death if their suffering from a terminal illness is overwhelming and they're aware that there is no cure, that basically there's no other way out of the situation. So for some patients, medical aid in dying is a wonderful and compassionate tool. But I like to emphasize that it's not the only tool we have for great end-of-life care.
Barbara showed us that supporting patients means giving them the full toolbox of care.
So for me, what it looks like is when I'm there sitting vigil at the end. This is a patient surrounded by their loved ones in a place they want to be at a time they want to be with their professional care team, whoever that might be, kind of directing what I think of as the symphony of their last days. That's what I like to see when it happens.
Dr. Barbara Morris and Dr. Victor Montori offered a rare kind of clarity. They exposed how easily systems can drift away from their purpose and how intentional we must be to bring them back. They reminded us that redesigning healthcare isn't just about changing workflows or incentives. It's about returning to a shared promise to honor the humanity of people we serve and the humanity of the people who serve them. If Dr. Barbara Morris and Dr. Victor Montori helped us see how systems shape the human experience of care, Dr. Kevin Larson showed us how those same systems shape the daily work of clinicians, starting with something as fundamental as documentation.
I remember a quote from the IHI, Don Berwick, that was from the patient's voice, nothing about me without me. And so how do we live out this partnership with patients, which patients want? They really want that partnership. They want that self-control. And we've moved in American healthcare from I'm telling my patients what to do to being a consultant with them and eliciting values, goals, preferences, talking through options, and helping give expert advice in a consultative way. So that's really shifted the whole culture of how healthcare gets delivered. And in that partnership model, a lot of patients want to be able to really understand deeply what it is their conditions are. And I think also with the availability of information on the internet, this idea that I need to give patients just some simple terms no longer is necessary. They want the complicated medical terms so they can go Google it themselves and say, hey, what is this complicated thing that my doctor told me? And they can actually find that information on their own.
Dr. Kevin Larson explained how the medical note, once a tool for thinking, has been stretched to serve audiences far beyond the clinician or the patient.
I think through time, as medical records became serving multiple masters, not just other clinicians or the memory jogger for a clinician or herself, it started to be necessary as a legal document. It was necessary as a billing document. When I started a documentation quality program at my health system, we discovered that after a hospital discharge, there were 17 different departments looking at that medical record, each with their own set of criteria and their own set of requirements. So we went from writing a note for myself, writing a note to my peers, to writing a note for lots and lots of different audiences that I don't even really understand or know what it is they want and what it is they're looking for.
The result is a widening gap between what clinicians must write and what patients actually need. He reminded us that much of today's documentation serves billing, compliance, and risk, not actual clinical reasoning or patient understanding. And even as he looked toward the future of documentation, Dr. Kevin Larson grounded us in reality.
We're at the AI stage like we were when we had Nokia cell phones. We finally, everybody had a cell phone, but we didn't know what all the features and functions were, and it didn't actually kind of sort itself out yet. We're in that kind of rapid innovation space in this ambient AI, and we don't yet have the iPhone of ambient AI. We have the Nokia little brick phone of ambient AI.
He explained to us that we can't tech our way out of a system that asks clinicians to document things that don't matter. Instead, we have to redesign documentation from the ground up so it becomes a clinical tool again, not a burden. If Dr. Larson revealed the cracks in our current systems, Pranam Ben showed us what compels someone to try to rebuild them, not theory, but personal experience.
I had this personal experience in 2009. I was having acute stomach pain and I didn't know what was wrong, right? So a visit to the urgent care, a visit to the ER, I probably ran a $20,000 bill that night, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And as I was walking to the parking lot, I was thinking like, what just happened, right?
Yeah.
I got the system, I took up time, resources, and I'm walking away with no diagnosis of what actually happened that.
Yeah.
And then I decided that was the personal experience that triggered my foray to becoming an entrepreneur. I had enough understanding of the system at that point to want to do something about it. And the first company that I started was an online patient referral platform. So to allow for that urgent care and the ER to share patient information without hassling, the patients to carry the burden of that information, right? So I started that business in mid-2009. Then I sold the business and moved on with my entrepreneurial journey in early 2012, which is when I started the garage.
Yeah.
So the garage was formed the same day that the first batch of ACOs were formed in the country. It was, for me, it was harmonious to kind of figure out, okay, healthcare is broken, something's got to give, right? So I decided the garage is going to be that platform, that hub for value innovations that empower value-based care.
That night in the emergency department became the blueprint for the system he set out to build, one capable of knitting together the fragments of value-based care into something coherent.
When we started, a key design principle was to be a system that brought it all together. A platform that brings it all together, data, workflows, users, and systems, right? And that bring it together definition is what coined the operating system mindset.
Sure.
So we said, okay, then if we are building that operating system that brings it all together, and in that, we kind of contextualize our own identity as the platform being like the Windows of value-based care. Windows is the most used operating system in the world. And
Yeah.
today, when you or I use Windows on our laptop or whatever device, we don't question it. It's something that you just operate on, right?
Mhm.
So we look at our platform as the Windows of value-based care. And in delivering that, we look at the company as the Microsoft of value-based care. So that's kind of like how that whole premise was built and conceived, that we want to build this operating system that brings all the experiences, all the data, harmonizes the workflows, and unifies the users onto one operating system, so you can then be successful in coordinated care and value-based care.
And yet, even with all this infrastructure, Pranam reminded us that transformation only works if patients actually understand and trust the system they're entering.
If we can usher in a new era of trust and transparency that is driven by data and technology, right?
Mhm.
And then make it much easier for our patients to interact with the system. Healthcare doesn't need to be difficult, Dr. Jim.
Yeah.
It is very complicated, but for the patient, it is a matter of, receiving a service and paying for the service, just like any other service-oriented industry that you can think of.
Mhm.
Right? So the complexity of the system should not bear down on the patient. So if you can create a digital layer in between, almost like a digital front door, that makes it easy for the patient in a trustworthy way, in a transparent way, I think we will automatically, naturally align with every patient's expectation, every patient's freedom, trust, ownership, right? And I
Yeah.
think that's the most logical way for us to come at it as a constituent.
Together, Dr. Kevin Larson and Pranam Ben offered a roadmap for a future where technology amplifies rather than erodes the humanity in healthcare, a future where systems support clinicians instead of draining them, and where data serves patients instead of overshadowing them. Their conversations reminded us that innovation and humanity are not competing forces. They can and must move together, because the future of care isn't just about building smarter systems, it's about building kinder ones. So, as I reflect on the season across these 5 conversations, one truth kept resurfacing: that healthcare lives in that space between people, between patients and clinicians, between clinicians and the systems they move through, between what we intend and what we actually deliver. No matter which side of the chart we sit on, patient, clinician, leader, innovator, we're all ultimately reaching for the same thing: care that feels like care. Systems that lift people up instead of wearing them down. Work that gives back more meaning than it takes away. Every one of these conversations offered a blueprint for hope that comes from people who know the system, who know the flaws, and are still committed to making it better. These voices don't just reflect where we've been, they shape where we're going. That, to me, is the other side of the chart. And next, we'll widen the lens even further. My next guest is Ruth, a caregiver who spent years navigating the healthcare system along someone she loves. Her story brings forward a perspective that's essential and too often invisible. Caregivers live on the other side of the chart every day. They translate, coordinate, advocate, and carry the emotional baggage of care, often without recognition, support, or a place in the record. Ruth's voice reminds us that patients are very infrequently alone in the system, even when the system treats them that way. And if we really want to understand care fully, we have to listen to the people standing just outside the frame. That conversation kicks off the next chapter of season 2. Until then, stay curious, stay kind, and keep looking at healthcare from the other side of the chart. The Other Side of the Chart is a production of G-Berg Productions, produced, Hosted and sound editing by Dr. Jill Goldenberg. Music by Relaxing Motivational Corporate by Fretbound. From Free Music Archive, licensed under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0.